Hey, this is your sister and ally, Moi Fung, coming to you with another episode of Moi Talks, Life Beyond the Surface. Conversations intended to empower you to walk in wholeness and true freedom based on the Word of God. Listen in. Happy Sunday, everyone. This is your sister and ally, Moi Fung. It is episode 11 of Moi Talks. That's pretty exciting. So here I am. It is Sunday, June the 6th, and I have the opportunity of meeting and speaking with a phenomenal human being, a great gentleman, Carlos Anthony. He's a mental health advocate and he's a writer. And he'll be joining us. For those of you who are tuning in, welcome. For those who will watch on the replay, I truly hope that this show will inspire you to really live out this thing and walk out this thing called life. So Anthony, would you mind joining me on screen, please?
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I know the first time you had me was, I think it was back in February, and my wife was there, and we were talking about baggage and toxic relationships.
Yes.
And that was an amazing opportunity just to be able to advocate for men and kind of tell our side of the story, because I kind of feel like that there's not really much advocation for men. So thank you so much for having me on again. I'm so excited to talk about the stuff that I've been working on and the stuff that I've been involved in.
Absolutely. No, it's an honor to have you, Anthony. And yeah, I called you Anthony, Carlos. I did this already, right? So Carlos Anthony, you have two first names, but
I know.
if I call you Anthony throughout the show, please bear with me.
Okay.
No, it was an honor to have yourself as well as your wife. I think it was way back in sometime earlier this year, but it was just a beautiful conversation that we had as we spoke about relationships, spoke about emotional baggage and all of that. You guys brought so much rich information, and in that moment I knew that I would want to have you back. So here we are. I mean, the time is right. You have done a series. You are a writer, and we want to talk a little bit about that. We want to unearth some of the things that you've basically gone through in terms of your childhood experiences, and ultimately, to see with what you have to share, how it can be a blessing to others, how it can empower others. So let's get started with the video, because you worked on a video, which is wonderful, actually. It's a public service announcement. So if my dear producer, if you can just play that video.
I had a good job, beautiful wife and kids. I take good care of them. Now they take care of me. I wasn't always like this. I wasn't always so angry, so depressed. I used to be happy and optimistic. Then my whole world changed. The abuse just never seemed to stop. I thought it would go away on its own if I just ignored it, that it wouldn't last forever. But dealing with it every day felt like forever. They said, no one will stand up for me, so I have to stand up for myself. So that's what I did. I was silly to think there wouldn't be consequences for my actions, that I would prevail in a flawed system. I never thought part of the job was to be a doormat. I started drowning in my sorrows after years of searching and self-discovery. It was finally time for me to exhale.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful video. Carlos, maybe you can share, and I guess in essence what you could do, because I don't think we did an introduction yet, but maybe you can just share a little bit about who you are and just explain that video. What is that all about?
Yeah, well, that video was actually created a few years ago. This was actually before we even had like COVID-19. And we at first we were trying to partner with a charity because we wanted to increase the impact of the video, but we just weren't able to find the right contact. And then like this year with everything that was going on, God just told me that I just need to put out the video, and I got to just do it on my own, and then whatever happens happens. So that's exactly what I went ahead and I did, and it was just completely on brand, especially because I just finished writing my short story series, Pretty Boys Don't Cry. And chapter 3 was about my childhood trauma and some of the experiences that I had experienced that kind of molded me to make some of the decisions that I made. One thing that I tell my kids, especially my 14-year-old daughter, is we all have choices, but you have to be careful with the choices that you make, because your choices can become habits, and those habits can eventually form into addictions if you're not careful. So when I actually went ahead and I did this video, I was going through a lot. I was going through psychological abuse at work. The union president, he was like verbally abusing me, and I complained to like my supervisor, and he was afraid of the president, so he didn't want to do anything. So then I went ahead and I complained to HR, and then basically at the end of the day there was like no resolution. So I decided to go ahead and kind of create, and I was also dealing with stuff at home with my wife. We were also like arguing. I thought I was going to get a divorce, and I just went ahead and I just wrote. I had watched the Joker movie, and then I just wrote this. I wrote the script, and then we went ahead and we shot it. And then we were just like, I can't be the only man that's actually like going through this, that's actually experiencing, who's experiencing oppression at work, who is feeling depressed because he doesn't feel like he's enough in the household with his wife. He doesn't feel like he's enough with his peers. And there was a point that I wanted to actually go ahead and like kill myself. And that didn't actually happen. That actually happened 2 years after the video was done, when I went to Vegas with my friends. And at that particular point in time, my wife and I, we were on the brink of like divorce, and I was trying to establish boundaries with my ex, and she wasn't respecting the boundaries. And it just felt like everyone was trying to take my kids away from me. And I had felt so powerless, because in this system, in the system, when it comes to like family court, I feel with my experience, men don't really have like a fair fighting chance. So for me, it was like I was going to go through what I had went through with my ex, but now I was going to go through it again with my wife, and I already had like 2 kids with her. So it was just like that, with the combination with everything that was going on at work. And I was just like, you know what, it would just be easier if I just wasn't around, and my kids just received the insurance money, and I just wanted to escape. So that's what kind of like these feelings is what inspired the creation of this video.
Wow, that is pretty deep. And oh my goodness, I mean, there's just so many things that, and I get it, just what you were faced with, everything just kind of just overwhelming you.
Yeah.
And life does get like that at times. They say sometimes when it rains, it pours. So I can only imagine the emotional distress just coming from all angles, from work, from your home. But it's such a beautiful. Go ahead. What was that? You're on mute. I think you might be on mute.
Saying I didn't have a safe space, because I couldn't talk to my friends about it, because it would be like a joke, right? Because mental health isn't considered to be like anything in our community that is like respected. I couldn't talk to my family members about it because they didn't consider it to be a real thing, even though I have like family members that are like bipolar, or that actually suffer from like clinical depression. But like even with those people having those experiences, it still wasn't recognized, it still wasn't acknowledged. It was, oh, that person's crazy. You know what I mean? Like anything that was related to mental health, oh, that person is crazy, or it's just in their head. They don't actually understand it. So with me not having a resource or an outlet to go ahead and talk about these things, that's when I just went into writing.
Yeah, no, that's actually very beautiful. And as I always say, as much as sometimes life can be overwhelming, God doesn't allow these things to happen to kill us, even though at times we feel like it would be better if we weren't here. But it's really to strengthen us and to propel us towards purpose. And that's what I see is happening now, even as you have recorded this video and you're sharing your story through various different platforms, which is quite amazing. As you know, I do have a passion for the men as well. It's something that God has laid on my heart. Just out of nowhere, I'm also a mother to three sons. Um, I suppose that might have a lot to do with it, but also maybe my experiences, who knows? But I think ultimately what I found is that many men, they don't have that outlet, as you said, and just looking at our community, if you're from a Caribbean background, when it comes to mental illness, it's often not taken seriously, which is a real issue. I mean, you've experienced it, right? So here we are. Thank God for your bravery, really, and your courage to really share, because I know it's not easy, because there are stigmas and labels that are tied to the vulnerabilities, which is what you speak about. So tell us more. So you did this video, which was wonderful. You've been sharing and writing. Just share a little bit more about your experiences um, and how that impacted you into basically as a husband, as a
Um,
man.
well, I wasn't. I'm much. I've never been. I'm not gonna say I'm like an evil person, but I am a person that has made some mistakes, especially when it's come to relationships. And a lot of the way I was treating people was a lot of learned behavior from what I had learned from observing, my older cousins, my stepfather, my relationship between like my mother and my stepfather. Like that was my blueprint as far as like love. And because of the fact that I was raised in at a time where like kids were supposed to be seen and not heard. We weren't allowed to advocate for ourselves or ask certain questions, and there were consequences for us going ahead and trying to advocate for ourselves. It would be considered to be like talking back. So for most of my life, I'd either be like I was censored, or I would only say what I thought people would want to hear. So that kind of continued with me into my relationships with women. And one of the issues with that is it prevents you from being like 100% honest. And in order for you to really grow in a relationship, you have to be 100% honest. So I wasn't being 100% honest in my relationships. And I saw a lot of the damage that it was doing. I thought that because of the fact that, I was the husband, I was cooking, cleaning, working, and, bringing in all this money, that that was my job. And I thought that if I would provide, my wife or the lady that I was dating with like compliments, or if I was affectionate, that's all that I needed to do. It wasn't until like much later when I seen some of my actions or the consequences of my actions, where we're going to go ahead and affect my children. There was one point where my children had saw their mother in the shower like crying because of some of the decisions that I had made that had hurt her. So when that had happened, that's when I realized that I'm repeating the same cycle that I saw my stepfather doing to my mother. And I was like, I got to break the cycle. My son shares my name, so he's Carlos III. And I was like, I need to break the cycle because he has to be better than me. And that's why I decided to just dedicate the rest of my life to making sure that I break that cycle that's in our community. Because there are still like some of my friends or colleagues or peers that are still wrapped into this cycle, and they don't realize it, because our culture is very influenced by like the media. So what we see or what we hear on rap music, as far as the culture, and what we see in the music videos, what we see on social media from these celebrities, a lot of these toxic behaviors, it's idolized, and I just wasn't living right. And it took me a while to really understand and see that I needed to start making changes myself before there could be like real changes in the relationship. So when I wrote Pretty Boys Don't Cry, I started chapter 1. That was about like my first love in high school, and it was about my experiences with that and how I allowed receiving validation from my peers to kind of mold some of the decisions that I was making. And then as you continue to read in the other chapters, you see a pattern. You see a pattern with me going ahead and making choices, and these choices becoming habits. And then chapter 3 is when I actually bring everything back full circle, where I reference the experiences that I had experienced as a child and how it related to chapter 1, 2, and then the closing of chapter 4.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those experiences. And for those of you who are just tuning in, I just want to say thank you. I did see a message from Alex Ihama. Thank you for tuning in. For those of you who are watching live with us, I should say. And for those who will watch it on the replay, thank you also for tuning in. So I'm here with Carlos Anthony, and he's sharing his experiences as a man who's experienced childhood trauma and mental illness. And he's sharing his story really just to empower those men who often don't like to speak about some of the struggles that they face. So it's really an honor to have you, Carlos. And I really want us to, as best as we can and as comfortable as you are, to kind of share some of those experiences. And, you know, when you talk about cycle, what is that exactly? We really want people to be able to relate to what it is, to the experiences that, you know, you talk about, because I think it's at that point that they can say, hey, well, I'm not alone. You know, like I've gone through that also. So talk about some of the experiences as a child and some of the behaviors that were associated with that.
So as far as childhood trauma, abuse. So to give you some examples, I'm trying not to make it too graphic, and I even had to modify some of the things that I was saying when I was actually writing chapter 3, because chapter 3 was just really, really hard for me. I was literally reliving some of the experiences. I mean, some of the scars, I'll give you an example. So on my eyebrow, which you probably can't see, I have a scar on it. And when I was in high school, guys were getting razors, and they were like doing like the little slits in their eyebrows. But I had like a natural slit because the scar hadn't healed properly. And there were certain scars that I had obtained from my parents from when I was younger. And the reason why they didn't heal properly was because I wasn't allowed to go to the hospital. And if I'd gone to the hospital, that it would go ahead and bring questions towards social services, right? So I don't want to go into like too much details, because I understand the nature of the show, and I don't want to make anyone feel really uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so like physical abuse, as far as the psychological abuse, that just kind of came as I got older. It was just like a lot of just me being made fun of, me being isolated. Of course, there were times that we did things together as like a family, but as far as like the punishments weren't even or fair, because I was the oldest. And even though, I'm just gonna come out and say it, my stepfather had cheated on my mom. And when he had cheated on my mother, he had a child with another woman. So because their relationship had so many problems, they couldn't be available for my brothers and myself. And as a result, I had to end up taking on a lot more responsibility than I needed to at an early age. Right? My mom was really focused on her relationship with her husband that she had, 3 kids with, and I was the plus one because I was from a previous relationship. So often I was neglected so that she can work on her relationship and try to get that going. But
how old were you? Sorry?
When I don't know like how long he was having affairs, because even before that, like my stepfather, so my mom, when she was pregnant, or each time she got pregnant, it was harder and harder for her to go ahead and lose the weight. So he would make fun of her weight. right? In front of us. And it would always just kind of be like a joke, but it was like hurtful jokes. Because like if I was in the schoolyard and somebody said those things about like my mother, then I would want to go ahead and harm them. You know what I mean? To protect my mom. But the thing is like she took it, and then I would also have to like take his insults. And anytime that I would try to go ahead and like advocate for myself, or if my brothers did something that I found to be an injustice and I was going ahead and create matters into my own hands by providing myself with my own justice, then I would go ahead and receive even more punishment, harsher punishments from them. You know, so if I would be like, let's say my brother and I got into a fight, or me and one of my brothers got into a fight, and let's say I hit them, then, you know, my stepfather would be like, if you ever hit any of my children again, emphasizing his children, that, you know, he's going to make sure that he hits me even harder, or don't touch his children. So he would say things like that, excluding me. And that just went on for like most of my life. You know, I didn't have my parents. I saw them go to my younger brother's like basketball games and go to like, you know, their parent teacher conference. And then for me, like they would only come to stuff if I was like in trouble. That's the only time that they would. And if I got in trouble because of the fact that it was an inconvenience, then it would just result in them harming me. You know what I mean?
I am so sorry to hear that, and I know you're way past that now.
Yeah, I am.
It's never easy to hear that a child at such a tender age would have to go through something like that, and I can understand the isolation, the confusion, even, and boy, okay, so
yeah, because we weren't even allowed to ask questions, right? It wasn't like, you know, what happened? Why did he do it? There was no apology for what he had done. It was just like accepted. You know what I mean? There was no conversation. There was no dialogue. And if we try to question it, we would just be yelled at, you know, or they would find something that we didn't do to like talk to us about that and yell at us about that. Yeah. And whenever I could, I would just try to escape to my friends' houses or my cousins' houses for like sleepovers. Those were my escapes. That's because that's when I can get away from my parents. I wanted to be adopted. I wanted to be like Annie. Like, you know how Annie had, she was adopted by like Daddy Warbucks.
Yeah.
And then she had this like amazing life after. Like, that is what I had wanted, because I didn't feel like I had belonged in that family. I felt like once my father had died, that's when like I shouldn't have been a part of that family anymore.
And I can definitely see why you would have felt that way. Were there some behaviors that were exhibited like in school based on your experiences at home? And what was that like for you?
Oh man. Well, for school, I was in my grade, there might've been like 3 Black people, and I was like one of 3. And one of my best friends at the time, he didn't come to school that often. He had some issues and he wasn't at school that often. So really, I was like the only like Black guy that was there. And I actually talk about this in chapter 3. There was this girl that I was pressured into dating. And the only reason why I decided to be in a relationship with her was because my friends were like, oh, you're gay if you don't go ahead and talk to her. And I wasn't attracted to her at all. So because at school, school was like another escape for me. So because at school that I would receive validation from my peers, even if it was like things that weren't good, I still wanted to receive it, you know, like just like David. So like David, if you remember in the Bible, it says how Saul had gone ahead and thrown the spear at him twice. You know, most people, when they get attacked the first time, they're out of there and they don't want to go ahead and go through that. But because David also had those issues with his own father, you know, because he was receiving love and validation from Saul, that's part of the reason why I believe he stayed in that environment and he continued to spare Saul's life. And that's just kind of how it was for me, except for I would just do different things for validation. And because a lot of girls found me very attractive when I was younger, all the compliments that they would give me and the gestures that they would give me, I would want to go ahead and I would want to receive more of that. So I would do whatever I could to continue like this high of like validations that I would get from like my friends or even like some of the women that I was dating. And what happened was, after like she broke up with me and she dumped me because I didn't have anything to really say. I wasn't even attracted to her. I wasn't interested in really getting to know her. I was just trying to like keep up with this facade that came from the pressure of my friends. And that was just something that I continued to do as I got older, just in like different relationships. So when I wanted to find out why the relationship ended, I asked one of my friends, who was like the most popular girl in the school at the time, and she told me that I'm also whitewashed because I wasn't wearing like baggy clothes. Um, I I spoke very well. I was very articulate. So because of all these things, I'm not wearing bandanas. My pants aren't like sagging down to like, my ankles or anything like that. She's calling me like whitewashed. So now I'm feeling like, okay, there's something else wrong with me, because now I'm rejected at home already by my family. And I already feel like the outsider because I'm the one that's from a previous relationship. And now I'm being rejected in school. So I just tried to adapt. And by adapting, I actually changed. So I started braiding my hair, right? And then I started wearing clothes that were like slightly baggier. And then when I went to high school, where it was predominantly Black, then I started hanging out with, the popular kids. And like the popular kids, like I was very bright. So for me to fit in, I wouldn't produce good quality homework. So I would dumb myself down so that I would like get like a 67, or I would get like a 57 to pass, and I wouldn't just work hard, even though I knew the answers. But I would get things wrong on purpose, just so that I could fit in like with my peers. And my teachers would always tell me that I had so much potential, and that I was wasting it because of how I was able to like articulate myself when I would participate in class. And then that just kind of continued. So then in high school, I met this girl. I loved her. She's the reason why I actually got a job and started working, because from what I had observed at home, the man is supposed to work and he's supposed to provide. And other than like talking to her, I was like, what else am I going to give this girl? I want to be better than my stepfather. And I want to shower this girl with like gifts, because I'm learning from pop icons like Will Smith from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and Zach Morris from Saved by the Bell. Like those are who my teachers are, because I don't have the ability to ask questions from my stepfather or like from my mom, because it's not allowed, right? So I'm in this relationship with this girl. She's not treating me the way that I want to be treated after some time. And then another woman comes at me and she starts giving me the treatment, the validation, telling me all these things. And she's in my head and I absorb all of it. And then in a moment of weakness, I go ahead and I cheat. I kiss her, and we go on dates and stuff. And then it's all fine because it's a secret and no one knows about it. But then certain people start to notice the body language between me and the person that I'm having like the affair with. And then instead of ending relationships and being like completely healthy, I just moved from one toxic relationship to the next toxic relationship. But I hold these other girls and I kind of string them along, because I don't want to lose the validation that I would receive in these areas. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like the 80-20 rule, where you'll never get like 100% out of a relationship. But I would go ahead and I would leave a relationship that I might have been getting, let's say 80% for that 20%. And it's because that 20% might have given me a little bit more validation with my boys, because the girl might have been, more attractive or had a nicer body. Instead of just like being honest and being faithful, or just communicating that, hey, I'm not happy in this relationship because these are the limitations and these are the expectations that I have, and you're not meeting these expectations, and to just like end the relationship.
Wow. Wow. And you were still just only in high school and you were experiencing all of this. That sounds like a lot of internal turmoil at such a tender age. But then you eventually became a man, you became married and had your own children. What was that like for you?
Well, at 17, so after I found out that my high school girlfriend had cheated on me, I had moved on to another unhealthy relationship, but I left my mom's house. So that relationship is the one that I talk about in chapter 2. So I met this girl, and because of her history, I was basically ready to like take advantage of her or exploit her, the sexual services that she had offered to men. I was willing to exploit that within members of the team that I was in, because we were in promotions. And then it wasn't until I actually talked to her and she told me about her trauma and her experiences that I had empathy for her, because they reminded me of my own trauma and my own experiences. So instead of, just being a friend and, trying to find a good way for both of us to heal as friends platonically, I received comfort in her sexually, and she also received comfort from me sexually. And she ended up being homeless because she made some bad decisions, and I couldn't allow her to be homeless because she's my girlfriend and I'm a man and I'm supposed to provide and security. So at 17, I told my mother, this is the situation for this woman, and I want her to come and like stay with us. And my mom's like, oh hell no, this is not happening.
Oh, that's
yeah. So I left my mother's house at like midnight that day that we had the conversation. And then we went to a motel. There was like cigarette holes in the sheets. It was disgusting. But I wanted to save as much money as I possibly could, because I needed to know how long I needed to stretch. And I didn't know how long she was going to be homeless. And for me, it was like, if she's going to be homeless, then I'm going to be homeless, because I'm not going to let her like be homeless by herself. I wanted to be there for her. So after some time, my mom already knew that I wasn't going to be coming back. So what she went ahead and did is she packed all my stuff into a shopping cart as if I was like a homeless person. And then she like gave it to me. And when I came to pick up the shopping cart of my stuff, she tried to physically assault me. And then I called my stepfather and I was like, look, and I called his name and I was like, come get your wife, because I'm a man now, or I'm 17. So I'm not going to allow, and I'm taller than my mom and I have some strength. So I'm like, I'm not going to allow her to like abuse me the way that she abused me when I was a child. That's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. So I left, and very shortly after, that same girl ended up she got pregnant with my daughter. And she also had a similar experience with me, where she didn't end relationships clean cut. She would just kind of like transition from one relationship to the next. And as a result, there was a lot of emotional cheating. And I already had insecurity issues prior, right? So for me, and this happens, you'll see it in I talk about it in chapter 3, where like I catch her emotionally cheating. But then in chapter 4 is when I actually come home and I catch her in the bed with another man.
Talk about there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
There is a lot to unpack. And thank you so much for just being so transparent. I really appreciate that. Talk a little bit about the emotional cheating. What does that look like?
Well, I didn't even really know what emotional cheating was until I met my wife, and it was like much later into our relationship. I'm talking like late 20s. And what I learned that emotional cheating is when you're like you're having inappropriate conversations with other people, right? So this goes back to me receiving the validation. So there was a time where my wife wasn't giving me a lot of attention. And I would communicate to her that, I'm not getting attention, because I was used to getting a lot of attention. I was used to having multiple women around me very often. It's part of my past is why I still leave it on like my Facebook for like people to go through, because who I am now is someone completely different. But what they don't realize, when I was getting praised for having like all these different girls around me and doing all these different things, I was getting praised for that. They didn't understand the hurt that was underlying all of that. They didn't understand that. They just thought that, this is how I'm supposed to be, or Carlos is the man. So with emotional cheating, it was me having conversations with other women about like sex. It was me having conversations with them about them talking to me about, how much better of a girl they could be to me. It always started off the same way. It started off with me venting to them about my issues with, the woman that I was seeing. I would vent to them about the issues. They would tell me, and again, you'll see this in chapter 1. They would tell me that, they could do better, and, I would listen to them. And then it's like the grass is greener on the other side type of approach. So I would, start talking to them. I would talk to them more than I would talk to, whoever I was dating, my girlfriend or my wife, because they were giving me what they weren't giving me, what my wife or girlfriend weren't giving me. And that's when there were like expectations that things would happen as far as like us having sex or of us going on dates. So it would just start off with emotional, just like us talking and me receiving all the validation. And then like the physical act would always happen like much later. And when my wife would like go through my text messages or my DMs on social media, she would see the messages and she would be like, Carlos, this is emotional cheating. And then that's how she explained it to me, and that's how she broke it down to me.
Wow. Well, that's a wonderful wife. So are we talking about your current wife right now?
It is my current wife. She wasn't my wife at the time. She was just
Okay.
like my girlfriend.
And she broke it down to you.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, she had gone ahead and did something that was inappropriate in the very early stages of our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I didn't know that that was emotional cheating at the time. I just thought that she was just being disrespectful. But I didn't actually know the actual term until I was in my late 20s, and she was the one that brought it to me.
Wow. Well, I think what that sounds like, really the emotional aspect of it is really just the self-medication, right? It's when you're hurting
Yeah.
and there's deficiencies basically within you. Oftentimes you look outwardly for that sort of, it's just that sort of medication, if you want to call it that. So I can definitely understand that aspect of it. But in your marriage, did that stop right there? Like when she addressed it, um, is it something that continued, or was that like a one-off situation?
It did eventually stop. We just kind of had a pattern. So the pattern that we had is I would have a problem. I would talk to her about the problem. She would listen to what I had to say, but then she would go back to doing the exact same thing that she was doing before. And instead of me just being like getting like fed up and just be like, I'm out, I would just start working out. I would, put thirst traps up on the gram. And then I would start receiving like the validation from like girls. And then I would just get back into that cycle of like talking to them about like my problems. And then it would just kind of start over and over again. And it was just a process that just kept on going on. And it wasn't until we went to therapy. We went to couples therapy. And when we went to couples therapy, the only reason why I actually went was because I was like, I just want to go so that I can prove to you that like these are the issues in the relationship that are your problem, that you're not changing, that you're not fixing. I want you to see your issues because you only think that I'm the only one with issues. So we did couples therapy. And that's when we learned that we both had to do a lot of like internal work. And then from there, that's when I ended up doing like my own personal, like my individual therapy. And that's when I started realizing about some of my toxic traits. And that's when I started working on it. But it took time. I mean, there's like, even like my wife and I, we've been together for 10 years, married for 4. But we're in such a better place now in year 4 than we were when we first got married. When we first got married, she was like, once we get married, everything's going to be good with our relationship. Everything's going to be perfect. Like it's going to eliminate all of our problems and we're going to be closer. And I knew that. And I think that's part of the reason why like I had issues about getting married, because I also felt pressured into actually getting married. I didn't feel like I was ready. And the only reason why I did it at the time, proposed to her at the time, was because we had an argument. And in the argument, she was like, there isn't anything that's separating me from being like your baby mother. We're both your baby mother. I just have 2 kids and she has 1. And I want the ring, and afraid that I would like lose her because she was such a good woman. I was like, well, I don't want to lose her. So I'm going to go ahead and propose to her, even though I wasn't ready. And even though we still had a lot of issues. And I feel there's a lot of men that go ahead and they make those decisions. They do things because they don't understand there's a healthier way of doing it, and they get so scared that they just want to go ahead and say whatever they can to go ahead and keep their girlfriend or keep their wife. Like there's a bunch of my friends that I told them, friends and family, I told them, don't have kids after being in relationships. And they'll jokingly be like, yo, I love this girl. Yo, she's a baddie. yo, I'm gonna breed that. And I'm like, bro, you don't want that. You don't even know this girl. And I know because I have rushed all of my relationships. So I know the consequences of rushing your relationships, especially, and how messy it can be, especially when you have children involved.
Yeah. What would have been a better way? And I mean, it sounds like a rhetorical question, but what would have been a better way to move forward in the relationship? What would have been a better and more healthy way to move forward in the relationship without being married?
Without being married, I think honestly speaking, we should have just did a lot more work on ourselves. I think we should have provided ourselves with like a lot more space. I had an issue with boundaries and accountability, and I still do. Um, for some reason, and it could just be because when I was 6, I lost my intuition as a child. But when someone says that they're going to go ahead and do something, I don't hold them accountable. I always give them the benefit of the doubt, right? So I think doing the work to understand like some of my issues, then I think that could allow me to become a better partner and also allow me to better communicate. And yeah, that's why I think it's really like when people are single, I think that's like the most important time. And a lot of people complain about like being single, but I'm like, you got to think about Adam. Before Adam had Eve, Adam was single and Adam had a purpose. Adam had to go ahead and name the animals out in the safari, and then he had Eve. After he had his purpose, that's when he had Eve. I found like a lot of men that I know, they want to go ahead and get into a relationship before even knowing like their purpose or even knowing who they are. And you can't know what you want if you even know like what your needs are, and that comes from doing the work and knowing who you are, because that's how you can set up healthy boundaries. If you don't like something, you can say, if you do this, I'm not going to be around for this, rather than continuing to take it. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
No, absolutely. And you raised some very important points in terms of purpose and just understanding who you are as a person before really going into deeply committed relationship. But that's why, the thing is, life doesn't come with a manual. The experiences that we have, it helps to shape and form the people that we are, the thoughts that we have, the things that we do, right? The patterns that we create for ourselves. So I think, just listening to your story for sure, this is why it's so important for you to go ahead and share all of your experiences, share the things that you've learned, because people don't know. They don't know what they don't know, right? And just as you went through it in those times, you didn't know, and you didn't have anyone to teach you, to mentor you. So here you are. You can be a mentor to other young men who may be going through similar struggles. But I think it's quite amazing just the journey that God allowed you to go on, as much as there is just so much internal struggles there. You talked about the peer pressure, the bullying, the abuse at home, the dysfunctional relationships and all of that stuff. And here you are, and as you said, you're a married man, and your marriage is going well, I'm presuming. I mean,
Yeah, it's the best that it's ever been.
yeah. Well, that's amazing. And you have bought so what changed? I mean, definitely you changed, but what was the catalyst to the change?
Well, I would definitely say what started the change was like therapy and doing the internal work.
Hmm.
What kind of expedited more of the change was seeing the effects on my son and my daughter, which are my two youngest.
Yeah.
They would fight the way that my wife and I used to fight, right? So I would see my son being attacked by his older sister who's 9 and he's 7, and like the same way that she would go ahead and like yell at me and like swear at me and like put me down, that was how like my daughter was like treating our son. And then the same way that he would try to defend himself, I mean, he couldn't defend himself the way that I would go ahead and defend myself, but he would try. But we saw how it was lowering his self-esteem and the effects. And then that's when I realized that I needed to take a better leadership type of role in my household, right? I got to fix, because God just told me, he's like, if you don't fix what you have going on in your home, then you're not going to go ahead and do everything that I need you to do, because there's just going to be too many distractions, right?
Mhm.
So I started writing, and at first, my wife, was a little bit uncomfortable because I was talking about my personal experiences. But now my wife is like my biggest supporter. And I feel like with us being able to better communicate and really learning what our needs are, we have been able to better support each other with everything that we're doing, even as like parents. Because before there was like a lot of resentment. Like if I would come home and I found that, she didn't cook or clean and I had just spent like, 12 hours working and she has like mental health issues. So if I found that, that these things weren't getting done, and not only was I working and doing all these things, but I also have to go ahead and like raise our kids, then there was resentment because I felt like I was a single father and I felt like she was like an additional dependent. But one thing that I realized is that in the Bible, it teaches you like how to love, because if you honor your wife, you're going to understand that by honoring her, you're not going to go ahead and disrespect her. And if she is hurting, or if she's in a place that she's not going to be fully able to perform the way that she's normally able to perform at her best, that's when you need to be her husband and be there for her. And you might just need to step up. And you just need to step up until she's able to get back on her feet. And then once she's able to get back on her feet, she can go ahead and do the same thing to you by honoring you.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I wish, I hope, I'm going to say that again, but it's okay. They can watch it on the replay. No, that's actually beautiful. I think just in life and from experiences and from what I've seen myself and what I've experienced myself, we're less graceful towards our immediate families, like the children, the spouse, right? We often show grace to everyone else. But when it comes to those people who are most closest to us, sometimes we take them for granted. So it's amazing just to see that in spite of all of what you've gone through, that tumultuous life, that you're now here speaking about it. And all glory belongs to God, really, because there's definitely purpose. You talked about purpose earlier. There's definitely purpose on your life, and there's stuff that God wants you to do, and this is evidence of it, right? And just going back to what I had mentioned earlier, that just the things that we face in life, it's never for our room, but more so to empower us so that we can be the change that we want to see ultimately in this world. So God bless your souls, seriously. And I'm so happy for what you share and what you will continue to share. Tell us, I mean, I know that we've agreed that we will go on and we'll sort of do a series, because I'm sure that we can truly begin to unpack some of the elements of your experiences, the childhood trauma and all of that. And I think it will be a blessing to many people who will watch. Tell us just a little bit more in terms of the work that you're doing now, and the platform that you have, and maybe some of the changes that you've seen.
Yeah, so as far as some of the stuff that I'm doing right now, so I put out the PSA that we had watched at the beginning, which is Exhale, and that's my mental health public service announcement. I have a column on Cry magazine where I go ahead and I talk about how things have impacted my art. So one of my most popular articles is it's related about toxic masculinity in retail. And in that article, I specifically talk about how you're in a retail environment. So you dress well, and you're also being professional. And because you dress well and you are also professional and you're Black, so you move away from like certain stereotypes, you're often considered to be like less of a man. So in the article, I write how girls saw me as like Carlton Banks, but I wanted to be their Will Smith. Because if you remember in the TV show, Carlton wasn't the guy that was always getting the girls. He was kind of like the nerdier one, right? And part of the reason that Carlton was, a bit nerdier was because of like how he dressed and how he acted and how he articulated his words, right? Also, I did Love and Literature, so that was a short story series that Love and Literature hired me to go ahead and do. The series is called Pretty Boys Don't Cry, and that's all about like my misadventures, my hopes, my dreams, my relationships, some of my sexual experiences, my childhood trauma. And part of the reason why we went ahead and we did that series is because there's a lot of like men like myself who have gone through some of those experiences, but they can't really talk about it because, pretty boys aren't supposed to be cheated on. So like for any man to go ahead and tell his boy or his friend, or any of his family members, hey, my girl cheated on me, or I walked in on my girl cheating on me. Like, it's like laughters and it's snickers, and it makes you feel like a less of a man, like there's something wrong with you, when really, like, that person was going through something at a time and they made a choice, and it was their choice, and that choice had nothing to do with you, right? So that's part of the reason why I put out some of these stories. And I'm also I'm finishing up my manuscript, and I'm currently going ahead, and this week I'll be sending out some queries to some agents and publications or publishers that are already interested in my type of writing. So hopefully very soon there'll be a book, and the book will go ahead and just kind of provide a lot more details, because I basically synthesized 70,000 words into like 4 chapters, which was very, very difficult to do. There's a lot of details that were left out. And even though like I put some of the things that I did wrong and some of the things that the other people did wrong, there was still a lot of stuff that I had left out. And this book is basically going to be, it's really going to be like a manual for like men on how to deal with situations better. Because even in the Bible, you have a lot of stories of the mistakes that they make, and you also have like some of their accomplishments. And I believe that we're also supposed to learn from their mistakes. But in the Bible, it doesn't talk about like some of the mistakes that us men specifically go ahead and make when it comes to dating, infidelities, lying, like the list goes on. I mean, you had mentioned earlier that often the people in our house, we're not as kind to, or we don't provide them with the same amount of grace as we would for like strangers. And I think that part of the reason for that is because the people in our house, they're like a reflection of like who we are. So when we come out and when we attack them, it's a reflection of our insecurities of how we're feeling. Because especially as men, if you don't got nobody to talk to, you can't talk to anybody at work about how you feel. You can't talk to any of your friends about how you feel, and you can't talk to any of your family. It's the people that you live with. They're the ones that are going to go ahead and get the brunt of it. And that's going to come out when somebody makes a mistake and they drop a dish and they break it, or if your 2 kids are fighting and you're already stressed out because you're dealing with work and your relationship's not right, and then your kids are fighting, and that's when you start yelling at them instead of like getting up, talking, and finding out why are you guys fighting? What's the issue? Seeing the actual patterns, seeing how you're related to the actual patterns, and then just breaking the cycle. And that was something, like, we even changed our whole parenting style, because before we were more like authoritative with the way that we were raising our kids. And then we changed to being like more like conscious, and just really being aware of like what was going on, like our feelings, what they might be feeling, why they're acting out, how they're acting out. And if I was doing this at the beginning and my parents were like watching me, they'd be like, oh my gosh, that's some stuff that white people do. You need to beat your kids. You know what I mean? But now my kids, since we've changed our parenting style the last few years, they're happier. There's so much love. Like, I wake my son up with like positive affirmations, and my daughter with positive affirmations. I wake them up, I hug them, I tell them that I love them. I tell them that I'm proud of them. I tell my daughter that she's beautiful. I tell my son that he's very handsome. I tell them that they're so smart. And these were things that I never received as a child. I just received like insults. It was just what I couldn't do. You know what I mean? So recognizing some of the patterns and understanding like my feelings during like very frustrating times, along with my wife, she's also recognized this as well. This is what has just kind of helped us like change everything.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So you've become more mindful just about the way how you do life, which is really important. Yeah, some of us, especially coming from a Caribbean background, when you're raising children, it's you're the child, I'm the adult, I'm the parent, and you just have to do what I say. But what I'm learning, even for myself, is that kids nowadays they're not like us when we were growing up, and that's not necessarily the healthiest way to raise children, unfortunately. So yeah, no, that's quite commendable, though, that with yourself as well as your wife, you have changed that pattern and you're just really ready to impact change within your family and just to change that cycle, to break that cycle, really. Now, I have a question regarding your mother and your parents, really. Do you speak to them now?
Um, uh, it's kind of hard to like really say. Like there's no beef between like my mother and I. She did read chapter 3 and she wasn't happy with it. And then when she read chapter 3, she ended up going ahead and like reading some of the other stuff. And part of the reason why she wasn't happy was because of the shame that came with it. But my mom and I we haven't had a good relationship from the time that I was like 17 and she kicked me out and she put my stuff into the shopping cart. I only decided to reconnect with my mom and talk to her after like 8 or 7 months of not talking to her because my girlfriend was pregnant and I didn't talk to my mom for most of the pregnancy, right? Like I was doing all of that stuff by myself, dealing with all of like homelessness. I was dealing with homelessness and all of that by myself. And what made things worse for my mother and I is she went ahead and told my family members not to take me in. If Carlos comes to your house and he's looking for a place to stay, don't let him stay with you. Let him stay on the streets. So because of my childhood and because of how she treated me at that particular point in my life, my mother and I have always been distant. I mean, honestly speaking, I don't even let the kids, because of how she treated me as like a child, I don't even let my kids like go at her for long periods of time. You know, like when I lived in Toronto, my kids would maybe see my mom maybe like once a month, if even that. And I've never, because of my mom's relationship, I'm not that son that like talks to his mom every day on the phone. Like I'll go months without talking to her, weeks without talking to her. And when I do respond to her, it's like, you know, I'm just polite and I'll go ahead and I'll respond to her. And that's just pretty much it. I mean, I haven't spoken to my mother since maybe like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago when she had finally read like the whole series. That was like the last time she sent me some voice notes. And then after that, my response when she sent me the voice notes was that I forgive you. And then after that, I wrote an article about censorship, which is on Crime Magazine, where I talk about despite the attacks that you may receive or the criticism that you may receive as a writer, it's still important for you to go ahead and tell your story.
Amen. Amen. Wow, that's pretty deep. And when you speak about your mom, I mean, it's a lot. Let me ask you a question. You said that you forgave her. Do you think you really forgave her?
I think I still got to work through some stuff because I was talking to my therapist a couple weeks ago, and he was like, I got invited to like a barbecue. My stepfather called me, and when he called me, I didn't answer it because I was busy. But he left me a voicemail to call him back. So I called him back, and I was anticipating that he was going to go ahead and say a lot of the stuff that my mother had said to me. So when I finally called him back and I spoke to him, he said how he wanted to invite me over to a barbecue. And in my family, instead of like actually dealing with the issues like head on and openly, we cover it over with a broom and we put a mat on top of it so that nobody sees the dust, right? But that dust it just keeps building up, and then there's a heap of it after some time. So I spoke to my therapist about it, and he said, look, you can go to this barbecue, but there's still going to be that elephant in the room. And he was like, you're able to go ahead and do these panels, and you can go ahead and tell certain people off, but that little boy that's inside of you that wasn't allowed to advocate for himself when he was living with his parents, he's still in there, and you're going to need to go ahead and you're really going to have to deal with that. You're going to need to hold them accountable. You're going to need to go ahead and establish healthy boundaries, because if you don't, you're still going to have those other areas and other aspects of your life. And I've had those areas. Now it's getting a lot better, but that's another thing that I need to go ahead and do in order to like be better. So as far as like, do I feel like I really like forgiven them? I think I'm able to live with what has happened, but I still think I have a lot of work to do. Because a lot of it has been like traumatic. So I still think I have a lot of like work to do. but I'm not like angry at them or anything like that, if that
Yeah.
answers your question.
No, yeah, no, certainly it does. Healing does take time. One of the things that I think, and we're just coming to a close now, but one of the things that I think is quite helpful is just learning from your experience, understanding that hurt people.
Yep.
And so all of what you experienced from your parents, really, it had to have been a whole bunch of hurt inside of them for them to treat another child that way or treat their own the child that way. When these people are doing this, like the abuser, when they're doing this stuff to us, it's hard. Like it's hard for you to to really have that grace towards them. But when you come to a place where you've developed some sort of you've achieved some sort of healing, and developed maturity, I think spirituality has a lot to do with it. You're able to kind of give them that grace and understand that they're totally in a bad place. And sometimes, even just to start, and you might be doing this already, just to pray, pray for them, that God will heal their wounds, and hopefully these series, these writings that you're doing will help them to see, what's happening, because sometimes people don't know what they've done, the damage that they've caused. So I'm so glad that you're doing what you do, the stories that you're sharing. Uh, we're going to continue this conversation, Carlos. We know that there's just so much to uncover. There's so many things that I really want us to delve into, when we talk about the mental illness and all of that stuff, because those are things that we ought to unearth in our conversation so that people can really come into their healing. And this is why Moy Talks was created, is to bring to the world really um, real life conversations, so that people could see that they're not alone, that there are people out there that have gone through similar struggles and they're able to overcome, to do this thing called life, because it does get overwhelming at times. Sometimes we feel like we want to give up. So I'm just so blessed and honored to have you, and thank you once again for sharing. Before we go, and can you share with us where we can find your writings?
So you guys can go to Love and Literature. Um, if you guys follow me at Carlos X Anthony, I have like all the links to all the chapters in my bio, just to kind of make it easy and accessible to everybody. You guys can also check out my writing on Cry Magazine. I'm actually currently working on closing a deal with another publication. So if you guys continue to follow me on social media, I'll keep you guys up to date with panels that I'm on, more of my short story series, because I do have a book that I mentioned earlier, that hopefully should be coming out by next year. I'm hoping. We'll see how that goes. And then there's a follow-up to the book called The Sins of the Father, where I specifically talk about my experiences as a father and just where I have like failed. But yeah, so there, carlosxanthony.com. That's another place you guys can also find my writing.
That's awesome. So these are some of the topics that we will cover as well, Carlos, even as it pertains to fatherhood and areas where you failed. Parenting is no easy feat. That's 100%. But when, like you said, when we have individuals who are there to share, and people can understand that they're not alone, it makes it so much easier. So thank you so much, Carlos. So Carlos X Anthony, you're on social media. I will also post below the video on YouTube and hopefully on Facebook. So apparently we're not live on Facebook, and that might be due to, I don't know, like Facebook is kind of weird sometimes. But hopefully, if we get the video up on Facebook, I'll do the same thing there as well. But it's been such an honor and pleasure to hear your story, and to speak with you. And I truly hope that for those people who are watching and those people who will watch, that what you heard, it will empower you somehow, or at least get you to a place where you can understand that you are not alone. You are so not alone. So if you're, you know what, Carlos, let me ask you to give a final word. If you can just give a word before you go, what's your word of advice type of thing?
Oh man, if I could like a final word, if it has to be like about just being a person and like relationships and finding grace, I would say really just kind of understand that if someone is hurting you, understand that they probably don't even have the tools um, to even like properly communicate what it is that they're saying. One of the most frustrating things in the world is to be filled with so much emotion and not be able to express themselves. And often that comes out very negatively. Instead of a 10-letter word, someone will use a 4-letter word to go ahead and express themselves. So I would just say, just be patient with the world. Don't take things personal. Understand that people got their issues, because it's that cycle of hurt people hurting people. And you don't want to continue that cycle after you've taken offense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much once again. We are at the close. We're a little bit over, but that's totally okay.
Okay.
I don't like to rush conversations like this because it's my show. I can do what I want, right?
Exactly.
Yes, but thank you so much, Mr. Anthony. It was a pleasure to have you, and we will be doing some more series or some more shows this month as well. So we'll see you soon. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
My pleasure. Okay, so here we go. This is episode 11, and quite heavy, but it was a beautiful conversation because we do see the workings of God in and through the life of Carlos Anthony. We've seen how he's taken such devastating circumstances and really turned it into something beautiful, where now Carlos is just ministering really to other men who might be going through similar circumstances. So I just want to really encourage all of you who are tuning in just to not throw in the towel. It doesn't matter how bad your circumstances are right now. Don't throw in the towel. There is hope. And for certain, as long as there is life, there is hope. And so if you need someone to reach out to, you can send me an email at info@moifang.com. Also, for inquiries regarding this particular show, to be a guest or to be a sponsor, you can email moitalks@moifang Inc. Let's do that again, moitalks@moifang.com. It was such an honor to have Carlos, and I thank you all that tuned in. And for those who will watch this on the replay, God bless you. Once again, this is episode 11. I'll see you hopefully next week. We've been doing every other week, but I will be hosting these series with Carlos. So hopefully we will see you next week. Okay, take care.
I had a good job, beautiful wife and kids. I take good care of them. Now they take care of me. I wasn't always like this. I wasn't always so angry, so depressed. I used to be happy and optimistic. Then my whole world changed. The abuse just never seemed to stop. I thought it would go away on its own if I just ignored it. That it wouldn't last forever. But dealing with it every day felt like forever. They said, no one will stand up for me, so I have to stand up for myself. So that's what I did. I was silly to think there wouldn't be consequences for my actions, that I would prevail in a flawed system. I never thought part of the job was to be a doormat. I started drowning in my sorrows after years of searching and self-discovery. It was finally time for me to exhale.
Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, remember, life is way too short to be average, so don't shrink back. Don't shrink back, Masé, and compete with no one other than yourself. Be excellent at whatever you do. Enough love from your sister and ally, Moi Fang.